been talking about how the NFL is not perfect, but it is very much of a meritocracy, and they will find you and pay you. The highest paid running back of all time in the history of the NFL is Christian McCaffrey, a white guy, and now the highest paid player in the history of the NFL is a black quarterback. A guy who would argue against the idea of the NFL being a perfect meritocracy is Colin Kaepernick. He continues to make millions of dollars despite the fact that he is not anywhere near one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. ESPN has now signed him to be part of a documentary series. And I thought we're not spending enough time talking about some of the things that Colin Kaepernick has said, which are fundamentally not American, right? And by not American, I mean not of strong American values. And the worst thing that Colin Kaepernick has said, I think, in a public setting, and he hasn't said very much, was to praise Fidel Castro and Cuba. And the reporter who got Colin Kaepernick talking about Castro, because he showed up in a Castro T-shirt and praised Cuba, and I think that enough people don't understand why that is such an incredibly dumb statement to make, and it deserves more attention even now as Colin Kaepernick is making millions of dollars. So we bring in Armando Salguero, who I think I just messed up his name as we bring him in, and so I thought I was going to do a pretty good sense. Armando Salguero, right? Did I get that right? Did I mess that up?
No, you totally mangled it. It's okay. It's Salguero. Armando Salguero.
Yes. All right. So I totally mangled it. Now I want to bring you in. What isn't mangled is you covered this story and did such a fantastic job of it. And as I saw ESPN sign Colin Kaepernick, I was going back over all of the ridiculous things he said when he became a public figure and he began his protest. And to me, the dumbest and the worst thing that he said was about Cuba and Fidel Castro. And you're in Miami, and I don't know exactly what your background is, but I think you have Cuban family members. And I thought, you know what? I want people to actually understand why what Colin Kaepernick said was so dumb and so offensive to so many people who have Cuban relatives or Cuban backgrounds. And you covered this fabulously well. I was reading your article about him. So take us back into time. As Colin Kaepernick is still playing football, he is protesting, and he wears a Fidel Castro T-shirt. As someone of Cuban heritage, what did that mean and represent to you? And thank you for coming on the show this morning.
No, it's my pleasure for having me on the show. Actually, I was born in Cuba, so okay. I'm an immigrant. I tasted the bitterness of all that crap. And what I looked at in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick first started his demonstrations with the kneeling, the very first time that he did it and was demonstrating against, quote, systematic oppression and wanted freedom for all people, which is what Kaepernick said he wanted after that initial demonstration. That first press conference after that game, he's wearing a T-shirt that depicts a 1960 meeting between Malcolm X and Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. So it was striking to me that here's a guy rallying against systematic oppression, and he's wearing this likeness of one of the 20th century's all-star systematic oppressors. And so no one asked him about it. This happened in August. No one asked him about it until November when the 49ers were scheduled to play the Dolphins, and he was on a conference call with Miami reporters, of which I am one. And I said to him, okay, so you're representing these things and you're trying to shed light on these things, and yet it's pretty hypocritical that as you're doing that, you're wearing the likeness of this dude who represents the total opposite of what you seem and say to be against. And I expected, frankly, for him to say, hey, you know what? You're right. I didn't realize, or I wasn't thinking about it, or,
I bought the T-shirt because of Malcolm X, and I didn't think about Fidel Castro being in that, right? Like, there are a lot of things Kaepernick could have said, which still wouldn't have excused the stupidity of showing up immediately after you begin your protest against American systemic racism in a shirt of Fidel Castro, who is one of the great oppressors of the 20th century in all of the world. But he could have had an opportunity then to say, yeah, that was my bad. Instead, what did he say to you?
It wasn't a Fidel Castro T-shirt. It was a Malcolm X T-shirt. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, huh? What? Wait a second.
They're both pictured side by side.
Yeah, they're pictured meeting,
yes,
hugging. And, I mean, that's like someone putting on a Sharon Tate, Charles Manson T-shirt and saying that, it's really a T-shirt about Sharon Tate.
Right.
No, it's a T-shirt about a terrible tragedy. And don't insult my intelligence. So at the point where he was insulting my intelligence, I got a little hot under the collar, and I'm like, wait a second. No. You're not going – I am not a blitzing linebacker. You're not going to avoid me like that. So it was a back and forth in which he insisted that he was not presenting Fidel Castro on that T-shirt, that he was not in any way for what Fidel Castro represents, except that it went for about 2 minutes. And in the second minute, he starts telling me how great Fidel Castro is. And that, not the T-shirt, that is what was absurd, and that was offensive, and that's what I, really wrote about. He starts talking about how Castro did a great job in Cuba improving literacy. He did a great job in Cuba spending more money on education than he does the prison system. And how we should look at that as a shining example of how to do it, we being the United States. He's telling me how Castro was a friend to Nelson Mandela in fighting apartheid. And the guy, and it was like I'm sitting there listening to the guy born in Milwaukee, and this guy born in Havana thinks that he's full of crap because I know about Cuba, and he doesn't know anything. The fact of the matter is, it was one of those, but he made the trains run on time moments. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It was, so it would be akin to someone today saying, that cop that killed George Floyd, he really did a good job fulfilling his ticket quota. It's like, what? No, that's not what that's about. Don't tell me about literacy when people are jumping into shark-infested waters after they've learned the alphabet for free to get away from that system that doesn't allow them free thought. Don't tell me about the prison system not taking or not needing a lot of money when their prisons are dungeons. And basically they line up people against a wall and kill them via firing squad. And by the way, I know because an uncle on my mother's side was shot because his crime was what? Oh, he wanted free thought. He dissented. He didn't think communism was cool. And so that was just one of those exchanges that I wrote about. The Dolphins went ahead and played the 49ers that Sunday. This happened on a Wednesday. interestingly enough, Castro died that Friday, which was, pretty great. And so at that press conference in Miami, after another loss, his 10th in a row that season, Kaepernick talks about how I took him out of context, how I didn't, I did that journalism thing that, I really didn't say it that way. I said it that other way, except the problem for him was that the recording was on the website. And secondly, in that very press conference after the game, in which he is saying that I took him out of context, he again starts talking about what a good job Fidel Castro did with the education system, what a good job Fidel Castro did with literacy in Cuba. And it's like, so I took you out of context, but you're repeating exactly what I said you said.
We're talking. This is fantastic. We're talking to Armando Salguero, who was one of the only media people to actually hold Colin Kaepernick's feet to the fire and question him about his political beliefs at all. What do you think now about ESPN giving him millions of dollars to tell his story when you know that he is spreading falsehood about Fidel Castro and Cuba and arguing that the United States should take the lead and follow Cuba's lead when it comes to human rights?
Well, it's not about really Cuba. It's about Colin Kaepernick not knowing what the hell he's talking about. Either that or he is just a radical person who just hates this country. And I wish I didn't believe the latter and rather would want to believe, that he hasn't educated himself. But I have a sense that it is the latter. Let me give you an example. I think it was last year when American troops took out this guy Soleimani from the Quds Force in Iran when he was in, I believe, Iraq. Kaepernick called that a terrorist attack. So understand this. The guy who is the number one terrorist in the battle theater, that guy was the general that had Iranian troops help Iraqis set up IEDs that killed and maimed American soldiers. That guy was taken out by the American military, and Colin Kaepernick's worldview was that it was a terrorist strike by America. So, that to me was almost more offensive than anything he said about Cuba, because although I wasn't born here, although I'm, obviously Cuban born, I consider myself an American. And he basically, that was like, it was a takedown on the United States of America, which he is known to be doing lately. The other thing is, if you look at his Twitter feed, like on Independence Day over the weekend, he just totally rips the United States for being this oppressive, terrible freaking place where black people are beaten and they have no opportunities and it's the worst and it's terrible. And look, I don't deny the fact that there's racism in the world, including in the United States. There's wickedness everywhere, okay? But as someone who came from somewhere else, I'm glad that I'm here, not there. It just is galling to me, all these people that were born here and have the privilege of having been born here and think that they can tell me that other place is better. When my family was basically apart, for 3 years. I didn't know my father for 3 years because my parents sacrificed to get me out of a communist regime. Anyway, the point is, he's ripping the United States for all these oppressive things, and then his next tweet 2 days later is thanking the Disney company for bringing together this great deal that's going to, by the way, make him even more rich, okay, so that he can drive a narrative for black and brown people, whom, by the way, I am part of, all right? I mean, I am. I just am. And yet the juxtaposition of those two things, America sucks, but, oh, by the way, thanks for, it was wonderful to have a wonderful deal that's making me multi-millions of dollars in America. It's just sickening to me.
So why do you think, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your story, because I don't think it has gotten enough attention. And again, I was going back and reading to try to make sure I was educated to talk about this, because I was also sickened by the decision by ESPN and Disney to give Colin Kaepernick millions of dollars literally on the day after he denigrated the entirety of America on July 4th and essentially said no one in the country should celebrate the United States because it's an awful place. Why has the sports media mostly protected and encouraged and cheered on Kaepernick instead of actually pointing out, as you and I are, the inherent hypocrisies in his behavior and either the lack of intelligence based on his political beliefs or the outright anti-Americanism of those political beliefs? Why is he being protected?
Well, I don't speak for the sports media at large. I speak for Armando Salguero. But my guess, and this is only a guess, and I think it's an educated guess based on my interactions with colleagues and so forth, is for a great degree, a lot of these guys agree with Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
A lot of these, the fact that it took 4 months, 5 months for someone to actually challenge Kaepernick
on wearing the Castro shirt. You're right.
That completely irrational and obtuse moment where 1 minute you're protesting oppression and the next minute you're wearing the T-shirt of an oppressor. Shame on the reporters who were covering him at that time. Shame on them. And not just shame, I think that they agree with the guy.
Yeah.
And a lot of them probably like him. I'm sure he's a likable person. Generally, the media is left-leaning, generally, and that includes the sports media, and they look the other way on things. I saw a lot of retweets on Twitter of Kaepernick saying, hey, thanks for the great, Disney Plus, whatever, deal that I just signed. But I didn't see those same people retweeting his takedown of America 2 days before. And it's interesting to me how that plays out. I saw a lot of people that have an agenda of he needs a job. He's been blackballed. That's not right. That's not fair. Why doesn't he have a job? And yet those same people, they didn't say anything about Cam Newton being unsigned for months and months. Not a word. There was no movement to get Cam Newton signed. I believe Cam Newton is just as black as, Colin Kaepernick. He's got as many rights as Colin Kaepernick. He's better than Colin Kaepernick, but we're on the Colin Kaepernick bandwagon, and he's been wronged, and we trust that what he's believing is the right way to go, and so we're going to be all Colin Kaepernick all the time. And to me, I see that as a media member, and it's sad.
This has been phenomenal. Armando Salguero, I'm going to tweet out his Twitter handle. You guys can go follow him because I think he's been fantastic. I want to circle back around. Last question for you. I certainly do not understand what your family has been through with Cuba. I've tried to educate myself on why Fidel Castro is thoroughly reprehensible and repugnant to anyone who believes in capitalism or American democracy or human rights. But you said something that I thought was really fascinating, that as someone who was born in Havana, you feel like a lot of Americans take for granted, such as Colin Kaepernick, who was born in Milwaukee, the rights that we have in this country. I know it's been a couple of days since July 4th, but why do you think that is? Why do so many Americans not understand how fortunate we are to have rights that literally around the world, many people, as you mentioned, will die simply to get to our soil?
Because some people, they don't get it until they live it and go through it. And nobody's volunteering to live it and go through it. All of these social justice warriors, all of these people that tell you that Marxism is really great and communism and socialism is the way to go, and let's have, a redistribution of wealth, and let's, defund the police, and let's do this other stuff. You've never lived in such a system. You have never, ever experienced it. And trust me, you don't want to, because if you do, you'll know what a disaster it is. And not just a social disaster, but it's a personal disaster, because that system not just applies to the entirety of people, but it comes for you personally, okay? If my parents had not gotten me out of Cuba when I was 4 years old, I would have been in Angola 15 years, 20 years later, fighting in Angola for a communist dictatorship. All right? I actually went with my parents to the sugarcane fields, and at 4 years old, they handed me a machete and said, "Cut cane." Okay? Because you're part of the collective, little guy, and so get to work. That is communism. No one in this country has ever been forced to do that because the state or the government is forcing them to do that. Nobody. And it's funny because that, like I said before, that great educational system and that wonderful prison system that Kaepernick was extolling, I don't know of anyone, maybe outside of one or two people trying to get away from American law, who have killed cops or have downed airplanes or whatever. I don't know of anyone who is trying to get from here to over there. I don't know of too many people that desire to go from West Berlin to East Berlin. But the other way around, there is plenty of folks that were willing to sacrifice their lives to get out of East Berlin to go to West Berlin. There's plenty of Cubans who have died on the high seas trying to get out of that great literacy system to get to America, which Colin Kaepernick thinks suck.
This is absolutely fantastic, man. I appreciate you getting up early. We need to get you on again. It's Armando Salguero, and he absolutely killed it. Thanks, my man. Have a good morning.
All right, man.
That was phenomenal. You want to ask people why Outkick is kicking the ass of every other single sports radio show in the country? Play him that interview. This is Outkick on Fox Sports Radio.